It's not often an entirely new agricultural industry springs from nothing, but that's the case with medicinal cannabis. Cultivating the medical variety was legalised in 2016, and since then a lot of work has gone into research and development. Growing and harvesting the crop is precisely controlled, and as Landline's Margot Kelly discovered, it's also extremely secretive.
Rows of cannabis plants in a state-of-the-art greenhouse is a rare sight in Australia. The industry hasn't grown as quickly as expected, but this privately owned Tasmanian company has been quietly kicking goals.
The space is really interesting. It's obviously a rapidly expanding space, and because of the value of the product, you can obviously put a fair bit of infrastructure in to grow it, so it's a pretty exciting space to be in. All of our greenhouse software is really powerful. We have supplemental lighting in our greenhouses, underfloor heating, humidity control, temperature control, all of the really top-of-the-line gear to get the best out of our plants.
The company has licences and permits to cultivate, manufacture and research medicinal cannabis at its secret facility. It's not selling commercial quantities yet, but it's one of the most well-progressed operations in the country. It's been a surprise career twist for Managing Director Tony Roberts.
I sort of fell into it rather than chose it as a path, and I've been very black and white on drug use for my children, etc. So it is quite challenging looking at what we're growing and some of the responses we get from sectors of the community, but I've looked at a lot of the anecdotal evidence since I've been involved in this industry, and there is certainly very strong evidence, which will be eventually supported by clinical trials, that supports that this product will help people in multiple ways with epilepsy, pain management and those sorts of things.
The company produces two cannabis products: oils, which patients drop under their tongues, and dried cannabis flower, which is inhaled through a vaporiser.
There's a strong demand coming out of Germany and Poland and other countries in Europe for flour, and our agents in Europe suggested that's the market we should be chasing.
The raw product has to be carefully handled under good manufacturing practice or GMP protocols. That means glamorous protective gear so we don't contaminate anything.
So Margot, this is our drying room. And this is the start of the GMP process for flour.
And what actually happens in here, Tony?
So when we harvest out of the greenhouse, the plants are whole and just cut off at the base of the stem, and they are then brought in here and cut up in little pieces and hung in here, because when the plant is harvested, it actually has about 80% water in it, moisture, and we've got to dry that moisture right down to about 12% to start the next process.
Right, so this is where you find out what their yield is, how much dry matter they're actually getting.
Yeah, so we measure the performance of the plant in dry yield. So it's the amount of dry flower that we can harvest off a plant is the important thing. So we're looking at how much flour we can get in the dry context.
It's difficult to produce a flower as a pharmaceutical product. Every single flower needs to be nearly identical, the same size and shape, and critically the same chemical makeup. Paul Metcalf runs the manufacturing operations. For 20 years, he's specialised in herbal products.
A lot of the times in the herbal market, we use extracts. So extracts are basically easier to control because you extract the active ingredient out. Therefore, it's completely uniform. The challenge for us is with a natural product and a bud and a flower, which is subject to seasonal variation and all sorts of weather conditions, trying to get that consistent product is a challenge not only from the greenhouse point of view, but from my point of view, because we need a consistent dryness, we need consistent texture, shape, look, everything's got to be the same so that the patient knows if they get our product today, it'll be exactly the same when they get it next time they fill their script.
It falls to Dr. Max Edgley to grow it right.
We're quite limited in terms of what we can apply to the plants, in terms of pesticides and insecticides, so we've got to grow in a really clean environment.
He brings his knowledge from raspberries and blackberries to get the best out of the cannabis crop. What stage are these plants at, Max?
So these cuttings were taken about 1 week ago. You can see they're starting to produce roots now, and these are just about ready to go into production. From there, they'll stay in our propagation room for another week to harden them off, and from there it's 3 months in our greenhouse.
It happens pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's a remarkably vigorous plant. This plant will be pot-bound in a 4-litre pot in about 2 weeks' time.
So how many flowers do you expect this plant will eventually produce?
In terms of dry yield, we'll get up to ½ kilo of dry flower off one plant.
The company plans to build another 10,000 square metre greenhouse. In an Australian first, it's now growing medicinal cannabis plants outdoors. So Tony, why actually do this and grow outdoors?
Look, firstly, Margot, because we have a fairly large site that's been approved initially by the ODC when our licence application was first made. And secondly, we wanted to compare the costs of outdoor to indoor, noting that we knew they'll be less, but they're working out to be somewhere about 80 to 90% less than what we're growing indoors.
There are 25,000 plants growing in this open field. Just like the greenhouse, it's highly secure. We can't show you the boundary in case it gives away the location, but trust us, it's impenetrable.
So Margot, here are some of the most advanced plants in our crop, and as you can see by this plant, it's got quite a quantity of flower in it. The difference between here and the greenhouse, which we showed you earlier, that these have been grown for oil and they're also being grown for a longer period. So our perpetual harvest model in the greenhouse is about 14 weeks from cuttings to harvest. These have been in the ground probably 4 months and will be another month before we harvest.
Cannabis plants flower when the days shorten to 12 hours of sunlight. In controlled environments, they can be manipulated to flower year-round by blacking out the light for half a day. Grown outdoors, they'll only give one seasonal harvest. But some of these plants are special. Bred from auto-flowering varieties that produce buds after 1 month without needing the trigger of 12 hours of light.
So it will be great to have it if you want a cheapest greenhouse with no lights at all and no blackout, or if you at some point try to plant outdoor, you can have multiple harvests in 1 year because you're not affected by the daylight.
The company is growing its seed bank, hoping to supply Australian businesses as they begin to fill their greenhouses with plants. Because it's been illegal, there hasn't been serious research and development about cannabis. But across the country, there is a lot of knowledge about growing the plant. Marijuana is believed to be the largest illegally used crop in Australia. Legalising it came with strict rules to separate black market know-how from the start-up legal industry. All staff have police checks, and anyone with a black mark against their name can't work in the medicinal cannabis industry. Australian-grown medicinal cannabis is in its early days. Local patients are still reliant on imports. It's nearly impossible to tell how many companies will eventually have a product to sell.
There is something like 90 licences across the board, so that's cultivation, production, manufacturing and research, so a wide suite of licences have been granted. But at this stage there's probably only a handful that are operating under permit. Licences are a theoretical exercise you can apply on paper. It's only once you've built and have a facility ready to go that you will be given a permit to operate in the space. So it really is permits that are the key indicator of what capacity is online or available to patients.
Cannabis growing facilities are planned for every state in Australia, with promises of jobs and economic stimulus for regional communities. ASX-listed Can Group is building a facility in Victoria's Mildura region.
So we've already constructed the glasshouse structure itself, so that's 34,000 square metres of controlled environment glasshouse that's going in there. It's going to have a high level of automation in it.
Sites like this were only a pipe dream a few years ago. Now, the medicinal cannabis industry is trying to become an ongoing part of the Australian landscape.
We're challenging the boundaries. We're one of the forerunners in this industry, and we're really blazing the trail for other people behind us.